However, a witness, party, or lawyer addressing this court may remove their face mask as long as they are behind the plexiglass divider or while maintaining social distance behind the blue court floor line. As you can see, I too am maintaining social distance and will be wearing a mask in the courtroom, except for times when I must give a longer oral decision. And this mask is just as uncomfortable for me as it is for the rest of you. But for the safety of everyone, masks should be worn in this building at all normal times. Please make sure that all cell phones or pagers are turned off or not brought into the courtroom at all. And this includes everyone. If your cell phone goes off during a court session, or if you are reading from it, taking a picture from it, or otherwise using or looking at it during a court session, you will be asked to leave the courtroom or viewing area, and you will not be allowed back in until the court is not in session and you no longer have your cell phone in your possession. There shall be no prejudicial or partisan logos, insignias, buttons, signs, pictures, or similar paraphernalia allowed to be displayed on the person or clothing of any spectator. Should spectators violate these guidelines, they will not be permitted into the viewing area and will be asked to leave. Please be respectful to all participants and do not talk, eat, drink, or make any statements or demonstrations of approval or disapproval while this court is in session. Violators of this guideline will be asked to leave. Everything said in the courtroom will be recorded by our court reporter. So please, noise rules will be enforced. I want to thank everyone personally in advance for their cooperation in these abnormal times. But I also want to remind everyone in advance that the court reserves its contempt power to deal with any violations. Now, if both sides are ready, are there any motions prior to the commencement?
Your Honor, the state would have a motion with respect to a witness they intend to call, Lisa Matson. She'll be called at the end of our hearing, but we'd be asking for permission for her to stay in the court during the entire sentencing hearing.
Defense.
All right, discuss that with the state. We wouldn't object.
Then the motion to exclude will apply to all witnesses other than the stipulated witness who will remain by permission of both the defense and the state.
Thank you.
Now, the court is in possession, and it has been filed with the clerk, a pre-sentence investigation by the 22nd Judicial Circuit, Department of Court Services, Mr. Ryan Markowski. Mr. Markowski is present here in the courtroom, and I want to personally thank Mr. Markowski and the staff of the Department of Court Services of the 22nd Judicial Circuit for a extensive and, I believe, thorough pre-sentence investigation which this court has reviewed. However, at this time, I will ask if there are any additions, deletions, modifications that either side wishes to make to the report, starting with the defense.
No, Your Honor.
State.
Thank you, Judge. No.
Then I want to thank Mr. Markowski again for that report, which this court will consider and has reviewed. At this time, the court will ask for sentencing factors in aggravation and mitigation. And we'll start with the state in aggravation.
Thank you, Judge. Judge will directly reflect the state's holding People's Exhibit 1, as well as People's Exhibit 2. We'd ask that the court take judicial notice of these two items. The first is the factual basis that was submitted on December 5th of 2019. At this time, the state would ask to read into the record certain statements that the defense acknowledged on December 5th of 2019 with respect to certain statements that witnesses would make. The first would be Janelle Vanette. Janelle Vanette lives at 105 Dole Avenue in Crystal Lake, Illinois, on October 31st, 2017. Defendant Cunningham arrived at...
Hang on just a second, Mr. State's Attorney. The state has offered the factual basis at the negotiated or partial negotiated plea, And first of all, I would ask the defense if there are any objections to that exhibit.
No, Your Honor.
Then that exhibit is offered. It is admitted. And Mr. State's Attorney, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Vanette inquired as to whether AJ was a mummy for Halloween. Defendant Cunningham indicated that he was not dressed as a mummy. Rather, those bandages were applied after AJ, quote, accidentally spilled boiling water all over himself. In addition, Janelle Vanette would testify that on a snowy winter night at around 10:30 p.m. in 2017 or 2018, Vanette was walking her dog in front of Defendant Cunningham and Defendant Freund's home. She observed Parker to be in a running car in the driveway with the doors open and only wearing a diaper. She heard Parker yelling, "Daddy, I'm cold." She heard Defendant Cunningham and Defendant Freund arguing inside the home. She then observed AJ after he jumped out from behind a pile of plastic bags and yelled, "Boo." Vanette inquired of AJ as to what they were doing outside so late. He said, quote, "They were going to a hotel if Mom and Dad don't kill each other." Defendant Cunningham then came out of the house and confronted Vanette. She told Vanette, quote, "You better not fucking call the cops on us." When Vanette tried to engage Defendant Cunningham responded, quote, "Leave me the fuck alone." In addition, Judge, the state would ask that the court take judicial notice of the statement of James Rossow. James Rossow lives at 105 Dole Avenue in Crystal Lake in close proximity to Defendant Freund and Cunningham.
Is that also part of the factual basis?
Yes,
Mr.
Judge.
Payne?
This is also, all of these statements are part of the factual
Go
basis.
ahead.
Thank you. On Halloween in 2017, AJ and Defendant Freund arrived at his home while trick-or-treating. He observed AJ to have a number of bandages on various parts of his body. Defendant Freund explained to Rossow that the injuries were caused by AJ having spilled boiling water on himself. In addition, the state would ask that the court take judicial notice of the statement of Adam Lamberti, also part of the factual basis, Your Honor. Lamberti has been employed at BCU Credit Union in Crystal Lake for the past several years. Defendant Freund and Defendant Cunningham maintained a deposit account and 2 auto loans with BCU from approximately the fall of 2016 to the spring of 2018. Defendant Cunningham would request to speak with Lamberti when conducting her affairs at BCU. On 3 occasions in the spring of 2018, Lamberti noticed significant bruising on AJ, who accompanied his mother on her visits to BCU. On the first occasion, Lamberti noticed that AJ had an extremely dark black eye and bruises on his necks and arms. Upon Lamberti inquiring as to the cause of these injuries, Cunningham stated that AJ had, quote, accidentally fallen down the stairs. On the second occasion, approximately 3 weeks after the first, Lamberti observed that AJ had a cut and black and blue bruises on his arms and face. Cunningham explained to Lamberti that AJ had entered their basement and hit himself with power tools. On the third occasion, Lamberti observed AJ to have bruising to his face. Cunningham did not offer an explanation as to the cause of these injuries. In addition to that, Judge, the state would also ask to read the statement of Scott Barfus, also part of the statement of facts.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank
Canale.
you, Judge. Barfus is employed as a lawyer at Father and Son's Home Improvement in Riverside. Prior to the defendant Freund's arrest, he also worked at Father and Son's Home Improvement. Barfus and Freund had worked together for approximately 3 years and were the only 2 lawyers employed by the company. At the end of March or early April 2019, defendant Freund had brought AJ to work. Barfus observed that AJ had significant bruising and cuts on his forehead and the side of his face. After inquiring as to the cause of these injuries, defendant Freund replied that AJ had, quote, fell down the stairs. In addition to Judge, the state would, with respect to the statement of facts, there was also the statement of David Lewis and other staff at Gottlieb Memorial Hospital, also part of the statement of facts.
Go ahead.
Thank you. On March 18, 2018, David Lewis was working as a social worker at Gottlieb Memorial Hospital in Melrose Park. On that date, defendant Cunningham was transported to the ER after being found asleep in her car with fresh track marks up and down her arms. Defendant Freund and AJ subsequently arrived at the hospital. Defendant Lewis observed bruising to AJ's face and forehead. And lastly, Judge, would be the testimony of Jessica Crabtree that we'd like to read into the record.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Jessica Crabtree has been friends with defendant Cunningham over the past 5 years. In 2019, Crabtree observed AJ to have injuries to his face on 2 occasions. On the first occasion, defendant Cunningham claimed that AJ was burned by a pot of water. On the second occasion, defendant Cunningham stated that AJ had fallen down the stairs while sleepwalking. Judge, at this time, we seek to enter People's Exhibit 1.
Defense?
No, Judge.
Allowed?
Secondly, Judge, we'd ask that the court take judicial notice in Craig Summercamp Jr. petitioner versus JoAnn Summercamp, also known as JoAnn Cunningham, in 12 DV 71 in the 22nd Judicial Circuit. It's a judgment for dissolution of marriage. I'm tendering this to the defense.
And would that be 2?
That would be State's Exhibit 2.
Court will take judicial notice of the court files of the 22nd Judicial Circuit, 12 DV 71.
Judge, at this time, the State would ask to read into the record paragraph 4 of that decision.
Defense?
No objection.
Allowed.
Paragraph 4, the court thus finds that respondent, who is the defendant, JoAnn Cunningham, has been guilty of repeated acts of physical violence, including bodily harm and acts that endanger life or limb, i.e. the burning of tools, and therefore finds the petitioner has shown grounds by competent testimony. At this time, the State would ask to admit Peoples 2.
Defense?
No objection.
Received. And admitted.
Thank you, Judge.
The state would ask to call Officer Shipaw.
Be allowed. Ms. Freeze, now representing the state. Want to step forward, officer?
Yes, sir.
You raise your right hand and be sworn.
Yes, sir.
Do you solemnly swear that your testimony in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Have a seat right over there in front of the mic, okay?
Yes, sir.
Ready?
Yes, sir.
And you can take your mask off while you're testifying.
Thank you, sir. I can see.
Here you go.
Good
Go ahead,
morning.
State.
Good morning. Ma'am, can you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
It's Officer Kimberly Shipaw. It's S as in Sam, H-I, P-Paul, B-Boy, A-U-G-H.
Where are you employed?
Crystal Lake Police Department.
And are you a police officer with the police department?
Yes, ma'am.
How long have you been a police officer with the Crystal Lake Police Department?
15 years next month.
I'm going to direct your attention to December 18th, 2018. Were you working that day?
Yes, ma'am.
And what were your duties that day?
Patrol.
At approximately 7:49 that morning, were you dispatched to the parking lot of the Taco Bell in Crystal Lake for a report of a theft?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you arrived at the Taco Bell parking lot, who was there?
JoAnn Cunningham and her 2 children, AJ and Parker.
You indicated JoAnn Cunningham.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see JoAnn Cunningham in court today?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you please point to her and describe an article of clothing that she's wearing?
Orange jumpsuit.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the record reflect the in-court identification of the defendant.
So noted.
You indicated that the defendant's 2 sons were with her as well?
Yes, ma'am.
The defendant's son, AJ, he was 5, correct?
Yes.
And PF, if I can use his initials, he was 3, correct?
Yes.
What were AJ and PF wearing?
They were in T-shirts and diapers.
Okay, and did they have any shoes on?
No.
And again, this was in December of 2018?
Yes, ma'am.
When you arrived there, did you have a conversation with the defendant?
I did.
Was anybody else present for that conversation?
No.
What, if anything, did the defendant say to you, and what, if anything, did you say to her?
She advised she had been robbed by a gentleman at her house who had taken some of her belongings. He had taken her phone, so she had come to Taco Bell to have somebody try to call 911 for her.
And when she was talking about robbed, was she referring to some prescription pills?
Yes.
Okay. After initially meeting with the defendant at the Taco Bell, did you go back to her residence at 94 Dole Avenue in Crystal Lake?
Yes.
And did AJ and PF join you?
They did. JoAnn transported them in her vehicle.
When you arrived at the residence, did you go inside the residence?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you observe about the condition of the residence?
It was not good. There was parts of the ceiling were missing, and there was a big hole in the ceiling. The floor had been destroyed. The tile or linoleum had been up. It was raw wood. The door area was black with dirt and feces. It smelled horrific. That was just the main entry. As we continued through the house, the living room area had bags and bags of clothes and piles of clothes strewn about. We then went upstairs, checked AJ's room. The window was open. I thought odd because it was cold. And it smelled of dirty diapers. There were stacks of dirty diapers on the floor and overflowing. And there was a nasty stench. And then I think that was all the rooms that I had checked at that point.
While you're in the residence checking these rooms, what are AJ and PF doing?
They're running around playing. PF, at one point, I think, was on the couch watching TV. They were kind of running around. AJ was taking care of PF. He was kind of a caretaker for him, so he was kind of helping him out. He was hungry, so he was trying to find him some food. And they were just being kids.
Okay. And did you make any observations about AJ?
I did.
What did you observe?
Back into the kitchen, AJ had walked into where I was standing. There was a kitchen island in the kitchen, and he had come from like the living room area. And as he came through, I noticed a large bruise on his side.
Okay, when you are talking about his side, where specifically did you notice that bruise?
It's on his right, like right above his hip area, right side hip area, kind of all that whole space there, lower ribs, upper hip.
What was AJ wearing when you observed that bruise?
A diaper, and at that point he had taken off his t-shirt.
Okay, and can you describe the size and coloring of the bruise?
It was bright purple, and it was like a 16-inch softball. It was pretty good size.
All right. Did you have a conversation with the defendant about the bruise on AJ?
So I asked AJ, with JoAnn present, I asked AJ what had happened. Where did he get the bruise?
Okay, what did AJ say?
At that point he paused, and JoAnn leaned down, and in his ear she said to him, "Lucy, the dog did that to you, right?" And then he said, "Yes, the dog did that to me."
What did you do next?
I had a conversation with some of my other fellow officers, and I contacted my sergeant because I had at that point run JoAnn through our system and found out that she had a suspended driver's license, and she had driven to Taco Bell and then back to the residence from Taco Bell. So I had a arrestable traffic violation at that point. And I advised my sergeant that I wanted to go ahead and arrest her for that, as well as take the children in protective custody because I had concerns with AJ.
Regarding the bruise?
Yes, ma'am.
And at that point, did you contact DCFS?
Once we got back to the station.
Okay, so you did eventually go back to the station.
Yes. So
did they come with you, AJ and PF?
Yes. So one officer transported JoAnn, and then my sergeant came. We didn't have car seats in our squad cars, so I waited for my sergeant to arrive with car seats so we could get them in car seats to then transport them up to the station.
Okay, and when they came back to the station, did you have the opportunity to interact with AJ?
I did.
Can you describe for the court what AJ was like?
He was just a happy kid. They were hungry, so we'd gone and gotten the McDonald's for both PF and AJ. Running around playing with the toys, coloring. AJ was taking care of Parker, making sure he had enough juice. He would refill his cup for him, making sure he had juice. And we just kind of ran around and played dinosaurs, and he was just being a kid.
Was AJ well behaved?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he listen to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever end up taking photographs of AJ's injury?
I did.
Your Honor, for the record, I'm going to show defense counsel what I've previously marked as People's Exhibit Group A, which contains photos A1 through A4.
All right, defense, have you seen that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
And I would ask for permission to approach the witness to show her People's Group Exhibit A.
Allowed?
Thank you. I'm going to hand you People's Group Exhibit A. Officer, have you seen that before?
I have.
Okay, you've previously viewed the photographs that are contained on that CD?
I have.
And what photographs are on that CD?
There's 4 slides or 4 pictures of the bruising on AJ. AJ as a whole showing the bruise.
And the bruise that was present on December 18th, 2018?
Yes, ma'am.
Has anything been added, altered, changed with those photos?
No, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit People's Group Exhibit A, A1 through A4 into evidence, and I would ask to hold off on publishing it at this moment.
No, Judge.
Allowed? Received.
Thank you. If I could retrieve that from you. Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Cross?
Just briefly, officer, when you were doing your investigation at the home, did you learn whose home it was?
And for the record, Mr. Behoff for the defense.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand your question. Thank you.
During your investigation at the home, did you learn whose home it was?
Yes.
And whose was that?
JoAnn had said that it was Andrew's, which was AJ and PF's father, as well as her own.
Andrew Freund?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to interview him while you were at the home?
No, he was not present.
Okay. Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you. Redirect, State?
None.
Thank you, officer. You can step down.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Freeze.
The state would ask to call Dr.